Kang Dae-won's knuckles were white against the steering wheel of his black SUV as he watched blood drip from his split lip onto his expensive Italian leather seats. The man he'd just beaten unconscious in the alley behind his nightclub had deserved worse, had stolen from him, lied to his face, disrespected the empire Dae-won had built with his own hands and his brother's blood. But sitting here in the falling snow on Christmas Eve, watching that blood-stained leather that cost more than most people made in a month, Dae-won felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not anger, not even the cold control that had kept him alive in Detroit's underworld for the past decade. Just emptiness. Just the vast, echoing void where his humanity used to live before his brother Min-ho died in his arms 5 years ago, bleeding out from a rival gang's bullets while Christmas lights blinked cheerfully in the windows above them. And Dae-won, the feared Korean Mafia boss who controlled half of Detroit's underground economy, who made grown men beg for mercy with just a look, couldn't even remember the last time he'd felt anything real. Until a 7-year-old girl with box braids and a crayon drawing asked him why he was crying and offered to let him borrow her mother. Merry Christmas to everyone watching. I hope you're somewhere warm with people you love, because this story is about a man who had neither. Before we dive into this, and trust me, you're going to need to hear every word of what happens next, hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps us keep bringing you these stories every single week. And can I ask you a question? Where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your country or city in the comments, because it absolutely blows my mind how God connects us across every corner of the earth through these stories. Now let's continue.
Dae-won sat in that SUV for 15 minutes, watching snow accumulate on his windshield before he finally noticed the small coffee shop across the street. Nightingale Coffee House, the sign read, in faded letters, with string lights blinking in the window and steam fogging the glass. It was nearly empty. Most people were home with their families, doing whatever normal people did on Christmas Eve. Dae-won wouldn't know. He'd spent the evening at his flagship nightclub, watching his employees pretend to enjoy the mandatory Christmas party he threw every year, watching them laugh too loud at his jokes and avoid his eyes when they thought he wasn't looking, watching them be afraid of him. Because that's what he was now, not a person, just a thing people feared. He'd left his own party at 9 p.m., unable to stand another minute of the pretense, and driven aimlessly through Detroit's east side until he'd ended up here, in front of this coffee shop that looked like it had been transplanted from a Hallmark movie into the middle of his violent reality. The bell above the door chimed when he entered, and Dae-won immediately regretted the decision. The warmth hit him first. Not just the temperature change from the sub-zero night outside, but the kind of warmth that came from cinnamon and coffee and Christmas music playing softly from speakers that had seen better days. The kind of warmth that reminded him of his mother's kitchen before she died, before Min-ho died, before everything good in his life turned to ash. A woman stood behind the counter, late 20s maybe, with rich brown skin and exhausted eyes that tracked him the moment he walked in. She wore a green apron over a faded sweater, and her hands stilled on the espresso machine as she watched him approach. Dae-won knew what he looked like. 6 feet tall, expensive black wool coat that probably cost more than this woman made in 3 months, dragon tattoo climbing up his neck that he'd stopped bothering to hide years ago, split lips still bleeding slightly from the fight 20 minutes earlier. He looked exactly like what he was, dangerous. "We close in 30 minutes. The woman said, her voice carefully neutral, but Dae-won heard the tension underneath. She was afraid, trying not to show it, probably calculating whether this well-dressed Korean man with blood on his face was going to rob her or worse. "But I can get you something quick if you need it." "Black coffee," Dae-won said, keeping his voice flat, unthreatening. He'd learned long ago how to modulate his tone to get what he wanted, whether that was cooperation or terror. Right now, he just wanted coffee and silence. "Please." The woman nodded, turned to the machine, and that's when Dae-won noticed the child. She sat in a corner booth, small and focused, with a box of crayons spread across the table and a piece of paper that she was attacking with the serious concentration of someone creating a masterpiece. Maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing a purple sweater that was slightly too big and had a small stain on the sleeve, her hair in neat box braids tied with red ribbons that matched the Christmas decorations on the walls. She was the only other person in the coffee shop besides him and the woman. Her mother, Daewon guessed, based on the way the woman kept glancing over at her between pulling his espresso shot. The little girl looked up as he paid, her dark eyes meeting his with the kind of direct, unafraid curiosity that only children possessed, and something in Daewon's chest twisted uncomfortably. He reminded him of his niece, Minho's daughter, who he hadn't seen since the funeral, who probably didn't even remember him anymore. Daewon took his coffee to the table farthest from everyone, sitting with his back to the wall out of habit, and tried to disappear into his own thoughts. Outside, the snow was falling harder now, big fat flakes that were already accumulating on the few cars parked on the street. The weather report had said 6 to 8 inches overnight. Daewon wondered distantly if anyone would even notice if he just sat here all night, if he just stopped going back to the penthouse that felt more like a tomb than a home, if he just let the snow bury him along with everything else. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably Jay, his second in command, checking if the man in the alley was still breathing. Daewon ignored it. Let them wonder. Let them worry. He was so tired of being the person everyone was afraid of, so tired of being the person who made others bleed to maintain respect, so tired of being anything at all. "Are you okay, sir?" The small voice startled him so badly that he flinched, coffee sloshing dangerously close to the rim of his cup. The little girl from the corner booth stood beside his table, close enough that he could see the glitter on her sweater and the crayon marks on her small brown hands. She held a piece of paper, her drawing, Daewon realized, and she was looking at him with a genuine concern that he hadn't seen directed at him in years. Adults didn't look at him with concern. Adults looked at him with fear or greed or the fake friendliness of people who wanted something. But this child was looking at him like he was a person who might need help, and Daewon's carefully constructed walls started to crack in ways he absolutely could not afford. "I'm fine," he said, but his voice came out rougher than he intended, and the little girl's concern deepened into something that looked uncomfortably like pity. From the corner of his eye, Daewon saw the mother tense behind the counter, saw her start to move toward them, and he understood immediately. Single mother, working Christmas Eve, daughter in tow because childcare was expensive and family wasn't available. This woman was terrified that her daughter had just approached a dangerous stranger, and she was calculating how to get her child away from him without provoking him. The thought made something in Daewon's chest hurt in a way that violence never did.
"You look really sad," the little girl said, tilting her head and studying him with the kind of brutal honesty that only children and drunk people possessed. "It's Christmas Eve. Are you all alone?" Before Daewon could answer, before he could lie and say he was fine, that he preferred being alone, that he didn't need anything from anyone, the mother arrived at their table, her hand gentle but firm on her daughter's shoulder. "Zara, baby, you can't just bother people who are trying to have their coffee in peace." The woman's eyes met Daewon's, apologetic but guarded. "I'm so sorry. She's very friendly, too friendly sometimes." "It's fine," Daewon heard himself say, and he meant it. Looking at this child, Zara, her mother had called her, something in him responded to her innocent concern in ways he didn't understand and couldn't afford to examine. "She's not bothering me." "Can I sit with you?" Zara asked immediately, already sliding into the booth across from him before either adult could object, her crayon drawing clutched in her small hands like a passport to his table. "I made this for my mom, but she's working and I'm bored, and you look like you need a friend." The mother, tall and tired and trying so hard to keep her exhaustion from showing on her face, looked at Daewon with an expression that clearly said she would remove her daughter by force if necessary, social niceties be damned. Daewon saw himself through her eyes at that moment, a strange Korean man with a visible tattoo and blood on his expensive clothes, sitting alone on Christmas Eve in a nearly empty coffee shop, radiating the kind of controlled danger that came from years of violence. He was exactly the kind of person a good mother would protect her daughter from, and she would be absolutely right. "Just for a minute," Daewon said quietly, looking at the mother, trying to communicate something he didn't have words for. "I won't hurt her. I'm not that far gone yet. Please, if that's okay with you."
The mother hesitated, clearly torn between protecting her daughter and not offending what she probably thought was a gang member who could make her life very difficult. Her hands were rough, Daewon noticed. Working hands, multiple jobs probably. She wore a wedding ring on a chain around her neck instead of on her finger, widowed or divorced, keeping the ring for sentimental reasons but not wanting to wear it anymore. The observation came automatically, years of reading people to stay alive in his line of work. Finally, she nodded once, sharp. 5 minutes, Zara, then you let the nice man have his coffee in peace. He's not having it in peace, Zara said, matter-of-factly, already spreading her drawing across the table for him to see. Mommy, look, he's having it in sadness. That's why I'm here. The mother's lips twitched despite herself, and she retreated back to the counter, but Daewon could feel her watching them like a hawk, ready to intervene at the first sign of anything wrong. He couldn't blame her. If he'd had a child, he would have... The thought cut off before he could finish it. He'd never have children, never have a family. People like him didn't get those things. People like him just bled others until someone finally bled them back. This is my family, Zara announced, pushing the drawing toward him with the pride of a museum curator presenting a priceless artifact. The picture showed 2 stick figures, one tall with curly hair, one small with braids, holding hands in front of a house. That's me and my mommy. We don't have a big family, but mommy says we're enough. Daewon looked at the drawing, at the careful way this 7-year-old had drawn hearts around her and her mother, at the sun shining in the corner, and the flowers that were probably supposed to be a garden, but looked more like colorful explosions. Something in his throat got tight. It's a beautiful family, he said, and meant it more than he'd meant anything in years. Do you have a family? Zara asked, and God, children really did just go straight for the jugular, didn't they? I did once, Daewon said, the words coming out before he could stop them. Not anymore. Zara's face scrunched up in sympathetic sadness that actually hurt to look at. Oh no, that's really sad. What happened to them? Zara, her mother warned from the counter, clearly hearing the conversation and ready to shut it down if it got too personal or upset him. But Daewon shook his head slightly, telling her it was okay, even though it absolutely wasn't. My brother died, he said simply, because what else was there to say? That Min-ho had been gunned down in the street like a dog? That Daewon had held him while he bled out, had watched the light go out of his eyes while Christmas carolers sang about peace on earth 2 blocks away? That he'd spent the last 5 years becoming exactly the kind of monster his brother had begged him not to become? 5 years ago, on Christmas.
Oh, Zara said, her small voice going even softer. That's why you're so sad on Christmas Eve, because you're remembering him. She reached across the table and put her small brown hand on his much larger, scarred one, and Daewon felt that simple touch like an electric shock. When was the last time someone had touched him with kindness instead of fear? My daddy left when I was a baby, so I don't really remember him, but Mommy says it's okay to be sad about people who aren't here anymore. She says sadness is just love with nowhere to go. Daewon's vision blurred. He blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall in front of this child. But she'd somehow articulated the thing he'd been feeling for 5 years. All this rage, all this violence, all this carefully controlled emptiness. It was just love with nowhere to go. Love for his brother who'd been his best friend, his protector, his moral compass. Love for the family they'd planned to build together when they finally got out of the life that had eventually killed Min-ho. Love for the man Daewon used to be before grief turned him into something cold and hollow. "What makes you happy, sir?"
asked Zara, tilting her head with genuine curiosity, and Daewon realized with dawning horror that he couldn't answer that question. What made him happy? Money? No, he had more than he could spend. Power? It just isolated him further. Respect? People feared him, which wasn't the same thing at all. When was the last time he'd been genuinely happy? When had he last laughed? Really laughed, not the cold chuckle he used to intimidate people. When had he last felt anything except anger and emptiness? I don't know, he admitted, and saying it out loud made it somehow more terrible. I honestly don't know anymore. Zara considered this with the seriousness of a child trying to solve a complex problem. Well, you should find something. Everybody needs something that makes them smile. She counted on her small fingers. I like coloring and hot chocolate and when mommy reads to me before bed and snow days when school is canceled and when the church ladies give me candy after service. See? 5 things. You should find 5 things. That's a lot of things, Daewon said, his voice catching slightly, because this 7-year-old was trying to teach him how to be human again, and he didn't deserve her kindness. It's not that hard, Zara insisted. You just have to pay attention to the little stuff. Big stuff is usually sad or scary. Little stuff is where all the good things hide. She paused, noticing something, and leaned forward with concern. Sir, is that a dragon on your neck? That's so cool. Is he protecting you? Daewon's hand went unconsciously to the tattoo that climbed from his collarbone to behind his ear, the black dragon that he'd gotten the day after Minho's funeral. Something like that, he said quietly. Everybody needs somebody to protect them, Zara said wisely, sounding far older than 7. Even grown-ups, especially grown-ups actually, because they think they have to be brave all the time, and that makes them really tired.
And just like that, this child had seen through him completely. Daewon felt something in his chest crack wide open. All the pressure he'd been carrying for 5 years, finding a fault line and splitting him apart. He was so tired. Tired of being brave, of being feared, of being the person who protected everyone else while having no one to protect him. Tired of being alone in rooms full of people. Tired of being alive but not living. Tired of everything except this strange conversation with a 7-year-old who saw him as a sad man who needed help instead of a monster who needed to be avoided. Can I ask you something? And I really want you to think about this as we go through the rest of this story. When was the last time someone saw you? Not looked at you, but really, really, really saw you. The way this little girl was seeing a mafia boss as just a lonely person who needed kindness. If you're watching this and you've got someone in your life who really sees you, drop their name or relationship in the comments and share this wonderful story with them. Mom, best friend, wife, brother, whoever. Because that's what Zara was doing for Daewon right now, seeing him as human when he'd forgotten how to see himself that way. Now watch what happens next. Can I see your drawing up close? Daewon asked, because he needed to change the subject before he completely fell apart in this coffee shop, and Zara beamed like he'd asked to see the Mona Lisa. She stood on the booth seat to lean across the table and point out details, the flowers she'd drawn, the sun with its rays going every direction, the way she'd made their hands actually touch in the drawing instead of just near each other, because that's important, that people hold hands. And as she gestured excitedly, explaining her artistic choices with the passion of someone who genuinely cared about her work, she lost her balance. The booth seat was slippery, her socks were slick on the vinyl, and she started to fall forward toward the hard edge of the table. Daewon moved without thinking, the combat reflexes that had kept him alive for a decade kicking in automatically. He caught her before she hit, his large hands spanning her small rib cage, lifting her away from the table and setting her gently back on the seat. For a moment, just a heartbeat, he held this child who weighed nothing, who smelled like crayons and some kind of fruit-scented shampoo, who trusted that he would catch her, even though she'd known him for all of 10 minutes. And Daewon, who'd spent 5 years becoming someone incapable of feeling anything real, felt his heart break completely in half. Because this could have been Minho's daughter. This could have been the niece he'd abandoned because seeing her hurt too much, because she reminded him of everything he'd lost. This could have been his own child, in some alternate universe where he'd made different choices and become a different person.
Zara! Her mother was there instantly, pulling her daughter from Daewon's hands with the speed of someone who'd been watching and waiting for exactly this kind of thing. "Baby, are you okay? You can't just—" She stopped, looking at Daewon, clearly seeing something in his face that made her reassess whatever she'd been about to say. "Thank you for catching her. I'm sorry, she's usually more careful." "It's fine," Daewon managed, but his voice came out wrong, too rough, too raw. "She wasn't bothering me, really." Zara squirmed in her mother's arms, clearly wanting to return to her new friend, but her mother held firm. "I think it's time to let the nice man have some space, Zara. You've talked his ear off enough for one night." The woman's voice was gentle but final, and she looked at Daewon with something that might have been an apology or might have been an assessment. "Thank you for being kind to her. Most people get annoyed when kids bother them." "She wasn't bothering me," Daewon said again, and he needed this woman to understand that he meant it, that her daughter had just given him something precious even if he couldn't name what it was yet. "She's remarkable. You're raising someone really special." The mother's expression softened slightly, some of the defensive tension leaving her shoulders. "Thank you. That means a lot." She paused, studying him with eyes that were far too perceptive. "Are you okay? You look like you've had a rough night." Daewon almost laughed, because rough night didn't even begin to cover it. Rough 5 years, rough entire life, rough existence as a human being who'd forgotten how to be human. "I'm fine," he lied, standing up from the booth and reaching for his coat. "I should go. I've taken up enough of your evening." "It's a bad storm," the mother said, glancing toward the windows where snow was now falling so heavily that the streetlights looked like distant stars through the white. "Do you have far to drive?" "Not far." Another lie. His penthouse was across the city, probably a 40-minute drive in this weather, but Daewon had driven in worse. He pulled on his coat, left another $100 bill on the table for a $5 coffee, and headed for the door. He could feel both of them watching him, the mother with concern, Zara with confusion about why her new friend was leaving. The bell chimed as he pushed open the door, cold air hitting him like a slap, and he'd made it exactly 3 steps onto the snowy sidewalk when he heard it. "Sir, wait!" He turned. Zara stood in the doorway, her mother behind her with a hand on her shoulder, but not stopping her this time, and the little girl was looking at him with an expression that Daewon would remember for the rest of his life. Concern and kindness, and something that looked like genuine distress at seeing him leave. "Why are you crying?"
Daewon's hand went to his face automatically, and his fingers came away wet. He hadn't even realized. Tears were streaming down his face, freezing in the sub-zero air, and he had no idea when they'd started or how to make them stop. He hadn't cried since Minho's funeral, hadn't let himself feel anything deeply enough to produce tears. But standing here, on this snowy sidewalk, having just spent 20 minutes talking to a 7-year-old who'd seen him as a person instead of a monster, Daewon felt 5 years of grief come crashing down all at once. "I don't know," he said honestly, his voice breaking on the words. "I'm sorry. I don't know." Zara stepped out onto the sidewalk, ignoring the cold and the snow and her mother's worried, "Zara, your coat," because apparently she'd decided this was more important than being Murm. She walked right up to Daewon, who could have hurt her so easily, who was exactly the kind of person children should be taught to avoid, and she looked up at him with eyes that held more compassion than he'd seen in 5 years of being feared. "Don't be sad, sir," she said simply, like it was that easy, like sadness was something you could just decide to stop feeling. Then she said the words that would change everything. "You can borrow my mom. She always makes me feel better when I'm sad. She gives really good hugs, and she says nice things, and she doesn't get mad when I cry. You can borrow her if you need to." Daewon heard the mother make a small sound behind Zara, something between a gasp and a sob, and he understood. This 7-year-old had just offered her most precious person to a stranger because she thought that stranger needed help more than she did. This 7-year-old had just demonstrated more emotional generosity than Daewon had shown in his entire adult life. She was giving away her mother, temporarily, yes, but still, to someone who looked sad, because in her worldview, helping sad people was more important than keeping safe or following rules or any of the things adults taught children to prioritize. Daewon dropped to his knees in the snow without thinking, bringing himself to her eye level, and when Zara immediately hugged him, this small, warm child wrapping her arms around him like he was someone worth comforting instead of someone to be feared, Daewon felt something inside him shatter completely. The walls he'd built so carefully, the ice he'd wrapped around his heart to survive, the numbness he'd cultivated to get through each day, all of it cracked apart under the weight of this unconditional kindness. He wrapped his arms carefully around her small body and cried into her shoulder like he hadn't cried since he was a child himself. Great racking sobs that shook his whole body, and she just held him and patted his back and said, it's okay, the way her mother probably said it to her.
"I'm sorry," he choked out when he could finally speak. "I'm so sorry. I haven't—" "You don't have to apologize for crying," Zara said seriously, pulling back to look at him with those wise, kind eyes. "Mommy says tears are just feelings that got too big to stay inside. It's okay if yours got too big." Daewon looked up at the mother, who was standing in the doorway with tears streaming down her own face, watching this scene with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I'm sorry," he said to her, too. "I don't know what's wrong with me. This isn't—" "It's okay," the mother said quietly, and she meant it. Something in her face had softened, like she'd seen something in this moment that changed her assessment of him. Zara has that effect on people. She sees things the rest of us miss. She paused. "I'm Simone Washington." "Daewon," he said, because giving her his full name felt dangerous, but refusing to give her anything felt worse after what had just happened. "Kang Daewon." "It's nice to meet you, Daewon," Simone said, and she sounded like she meant that too. "Do you want to come back inside? You shouldn't be out in this storm. And honestly," she glanced at the snow, which was now falling so hard that visibility was maybe 20 feet. "I'm not sure any of us should be driving in this. I was about to close up and call a cab, but even those are going to have trouble." Daewon stood up, still holding Zara's small hand because she hadn't let go, and he didn't want to be the one to break that connection. He should say no, should get in his SUV and drive back to his cold penthouse and his cold life and pretend this had never happened, should put the walls back up before this woman and her daughter saw too much of who he really was underneath the monster he'd become. But looking at Simone's kind, tired face, at Zara's hopeful expression, at the way they were both looking at him like he was a person worth caring about, Daewon made a choice. "I can't impose on you like that, but let me at least make sure you get home safely. The roads are dangerous, and—" he pulled out his phone, called Jay. "I'm sending a car for you. My driver will take you home. Wait to make sure you get inside safely, and then leave. No strings, no obligations. Just please, let me do this." Simone looked like she wanted to argue, pride warring with practicality on her face, but then she glanced at Zara and nodded. "Okay, thank you. That's very kind." The car arrived in 7 minutes, a black sedan with heated seats and a professional driver who wouldn't ask questions or make Simone uncomfortable. Daewon walked them to it, made sure Zara was buckled in properly, and met Simone's eyes through the open car door. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for letting her talk to me, for not just grabbing her and running, for everything." "Take care of yourself, Daewon," Simone said, and she sounded like she meant it.
Whatever you're dealing with, I hope it gets better." "Sir," Zara called from the back seat, "remember to find 5 things that make you happy, and don't forget you're supposed to pay attention to the little stuff." Day One smiled, a real smile that felt rusty and strange on his face. "I'll remember," he promised. "Thank you, Zara, for everything." He watched the car disappear into the snow, stood there until the taillights were just red smudges in the white, and then he got in his SUV and drove home. But instead of the usual numbness, instead of the familiar emptiness that had been his constant companion for 5 years, Day One felt something else. Hope, maybe, or just the absence of despair, which was close enough to the same thing. A 7-year-old girl had looked at him and seen someone worth saving, and maybe, just maybe, she'd been right. When he got back to his penthouse, Day One made 3 phone calls. The first was to Jay. "I need information on Simone Washington, works at Nightingale Coffee House on the East Side, and her daughter Zara. Not for anything bad, just find out what their situation is. Finances, housing, any problems they might be having. Be discreet." The second was to his accountant. "Set up an anonymous fund. I'll send you details." The third was to himself, a note in his phone. "Find 5 things that make you happy. Pay attention to the little stuff." Over the next 3 days, Day One became Simone and Zara's invisible guardian angel. He learned that Simone worked 3 jobs: the coffee shop, night cleaning at an office building, and weekend shifts at a hospital cafeteria. That her daughter's father had abandoned them when Zara was 6 months old. That they lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in a rough neighborhood because it was all she could afford. That Simone gave Zara the bedroom and slept on the couch. That medical bills from Zara's asthma treatments were drowning them. That the electric company had sent a final notice 2 days ago. That Simone's car had died 3 weeks ago, and she'd been taking 2 buses to work every day, dragging Zara with her because she couldn't afford childcare during school break.
And Day One, who'd spent 5 years using his power to hurt people, decided to use it differently. On Christmas morning, a delivery arrived at Simone's apartment. Professional movers, confused but well paid, bringing boxes and bags and envelopes. New winter coats because theirs were falling apart. Educational toys for Zara, age-appropriate and thoughtful. Gift cards for the grocery store where Simone shopped. An envelope with enough cash to cover 3 months of rent, anonymous payment to the electric company, the medical billing department, every outstanding debt that was crushing this family, and a note, handwritten, from someone who needed to remember kindness exists. Thank you for the reminder. Merry Christmas. Simone called the coffee shop, thinking maybe they'd sent it. Called the church she attended sporadically when she wasn't working Sundays. Called her mother in Atlanta, who definitely didn't have this kind of money. Finally, she just sat on her couch and cried while Zara played with her new toys and asked why Mommy was sad on Christmas. "I'm not sad, baby," Simone managed. "I'm grateful. These are happy tears." Over the following 6 months, good things kept happening to Simone in ways she couldn't explain. Her car, which should have cost $2,000 to fix, was mysteriously repaired overnight and returned to her apartment building with a note saying the shop had made an error and owed her a free repair. A job offer appeared from a nonprofit that needed someone with her exact experience, paying twice what the coffee shop did and offering health insurance. Zara's school received an anonymous donation that covered all field trips and supplies for students in need. The landlord suddenly found a billing error and reduced their rent. Electric and gas bills kept getting paid by anonymous donors. Every time Simone tried to track down who was helping them, the trail went cold. Day One watched from a distance, using his resources to make their life easier without ever showing his face. He had Jay arrange everything through layers of intermediaries, companies that owed him favors, nonprofits he donated to, legitimate businesses he'd invested in. He never asked for recognition, never approached them again, just made sure they were safe and cared for, and able to breathe without drowning in poverty. And for the first time in 5 years, Daewon felt like his power and money were being used for something good, instead of just maintaining his empire through fear.
But he also started changing his own life. He began stepping back from the violent side of his business, delegating more to Jay, focusing on the legitimate enterprises he'd built as a cover. He started therapy with a psychologist who specialized in trauma and didn't ask too many questions about where his trauma came from. He visited his brother's grave for the first time since the funeral and actually talked to the headstone, told Minho about the little girl who'd seen through all his walls and reminded him that he was still human. He found 5 things that made him happy. Coffee from Nightingale Coffee House, the way snow looked falling on the Detroit River, the sound of his niece's voice when he finally called her and said he wanted to be in her life again, the feeling of doing something good without expecting anything in return, and the memory of a 7-year-old girl who thought he was worth saving. 6 months later, Daewon walked back into Nightingale Coffee House for the first time since Christmas Eve. Simone was there, working fewer hours now that she had the nonprofit job, and she recognized him immediately. Her eyes widened, then narrowed as things clicked into place. "It was you," she said quietly, coming around the counter to where he stood. "All of it, the gifts, the job, the rent, everything. It was you." "Yes," Daewon admitted, because lying seemed pointless now. "I'm sorry for interfering in your life without asking. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about you and Zara struggling while I had more money than I could ever spend. It felt wrong not to help." "Who are you?" Simone asked, and it wasn't an accusation, just genuine curiosity. Really, because normal people don't have that kind of money to just give away. Normal people don't have connections to make all those things happen. So Daewon told her. Not everything. He didn't detail the violence or the murders or the things he'd done that kept him up at night, but enough. That he ran businesses that weren't always legal, that he'd inherited an empire from people who'd built it through fear and violence, that he'd spent the last 5 years becoming someone he hated, until her daughter reminded him that he could choose to be someone different. That he was trying to change, to step back from the worst parts of what he'd become, to use his power for something other than destruction. Simone listened to all of it, her face unreadable, and when he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "You could have just kept doing it from the shadows, could have kept helping without me knowing. Why tell me now?"
"Because it felt dishonest," Daewon said. "And because I'd like to know you, both of you, not as someone you're indebted to, not as some mysterious benefactor, just as a person, if that's something you'd be comfortable with." He paused. "I understand if it's not. I know what I am. I know what I've done. You have every right to tell me to stay away from your daughter." "The sad man came back." Zara's voice interrupted them, and she came running from the back room where she'd been doing homework, launching herself at Daewon with the kind of unself-conscious affection that made his chest hurt. "Mommy, it's the sad man from Christmas. Did you find your 5 things? Are you happy now?" Daewon caught her, lifted her up, and met Simone's eyes over her daughter's head. "I'm working on it," he said honestly. "I found some of them. Still looking for the rest." Simone studied him for a long moment, then made a decision. "We're having dinner tomorrow. Nothing fancy, just leftovers and football on TV. You should come, if you want to. No obligations, no strings, just dinner." "I'd like that," Daewon said, and meant it more than he'd meant anything except the promises he'd made to his dying brother.
Over the next 6 months, Daewon became part of their lives in small, careful ways. Dinner once a week, that turned into twice a week, that turned into him being there most evenings when he wasn't handling business. He helped Zara with her math homework and learned that he was actually good at explaining things to kids. He fixed things in their apartment that Simone didn't have time to deal with. He showed up at Zara's school events and watched her be a tree in the spring play and cheered louder than anyone. He taught her some Korean words, and she taught him the hand-clapping games she played with her friends. And slowly, carefully, he and Simone built something that looked like trust. "I know what you do," Simone told him one night after Zara was asleep. "I'm not naive. I know you're not running a legitimate business empire, or at least not entirely. But I also see who you are with her, with us. And I think people can be more than one thing. I think you're trying to be better. That counts for something." "I don't deserve you," Daewon said honestly. "Either of you. I've done things that... We all have things in our past. I'm not looking for perfection. I'm looking for honesty and trying. You're both of those things." She paused. "Zara asked me last week if you were going to be her daddy. I didn't know how to answer that."
"What did you say?" Daewon's heart was pounding. "I said that's something grown-ups have to figure out together," Simone said carefully, "and that just because someone isn't your daddy doesn't mean they can't be family. Family is who shows up, who stays, who chooses you every day." "I choose you," Daewon said, "both of you, every day, for as long as you'll let me." Simone kissed him then, soft and careful, and it felt like coming home to a place he'd never been but had always been searching for. "Then I guess we're figuring it out together," she said. On Zara's 8th birthday, exactly 1 year after that Christmas Eve encounter, they had a party in Daewon's penthouse. Not the cold, empty space it had been, but filled now with Zara's artwork on the refrigerator and Simone's books on the shelves, and the kind of warmth that came from people who'd chosen each other. Just a small gathering. Simone's mother, who'd flown in from Atlanta, Daewon's niece, who he'd reconnected with and who adored Zara, Jay, who'd become something like a friend. Zara wore a princess dress and a paper crown and commanded her kingdom with the authority of someone who knew she was loved. "Make a wish," Simone said as they gathered around the cake, and Zara squeezed her eyes shut tight, clearly taking this responsibility very seriously. "What did you wish for?" Daewon asked when she'd blown out all 8 candles. "I can't tell or it won't come true," Zara said. But then she leaned close and whispered in his ear, "I wished you'd stay forever." Daewon looked at Simone, who was watching them with tears in her eyes, and then at this little girl who'd saved his life by asking him why he was crying and offering to let him borrow her mother. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised. "You're stuck with me." "Good," Zara said, hugging him tight, "because you're family now, and family is who shows up." Later, after the party was over and Zara was asleep in the guest room that had become her room, Daewon stood at the window of his penthouse, looking out at Detroit. Simone came to stand beside him, her hand finding his, and they watched the city lights together in comfortable silence. "Do you remember when Zara asked me what made me happy that first night?" Simone said. "I remember."
"I found my 5 things," Daewon said. "Coffee from Nightingale, the way snow looks falling on the river, my niece's laugh, doing something good without expecting recognition, and this right here, you and Zara, this family we're building. These are my 5 things." "Only 5?" Simone asked, smiling. "Only 5 that matter," Daewon corrected. "Zara was right about the little stuff. That's where all the good things were hiding. I just had to pay attention."
And standing there in his penthouse that was finally a home, with the woman he loved beside him and the child who'd saved him sleeping safely in the next room, Kang Dae-won, former Mafia boss, reformed monster, chosen family member, finally understood what his brother had tried to tell him all those years ago, that power and money and fear couldn't make you happy, that real strength was in being vulnerable enough to let people in, that family wasn't about blood, it was about who showed up and stayed and chose you every single day, that sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected places, like a 7-year-old girl asking a crying stranger if he wanted to borrow her mother. And for the first time in 5 years, when Dae-won thought about Christmas, he didn't think about death and blood and everything he'd lost. He thought about snow falling outside a coffee shop, about a child's kindness breaking through walls he'd thought were permanent, about the way one moment of genuine human connection could change the entire trajectory of a life. He thought about being seen not as a monster, but as a person who just needed someone to care. He thought about second chances and chosen families and the possibility of becoming someone better than who you'd been. So, let me ask you something as we end this story. When was the last time you showed kindness to someone who looked like they didn't deserve it? When did you last see past someone's walls and fear and anger to the hurting person underneath? Because that's what Zara did for Dae-won that night. She looked at a dangerous man and saw someone who needed help, and she offered it without hesitation or judgment. Drop a comment right now if this story moved you. Tell me about a time someone showed you unexpected kindness, or a time you showed it to someone else. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to change, that family can be chosen, that one moment of compassion can save a life. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories like this, because God brings us together across this whole world to remind us that we're all just people trying to find our way home. And sometimes home isn't a place, it's the people who choose to love you anyway. Thanks for watching, and remember, pay attention to the little stuff. That's where all the good things are hiding.
Afro Tales. The weak will become strong one day.